Hello, everyone, and welcome in. Week 0 is here. My name is Bryce Koon, and as you can see, if you're watching us over on YouTube, Bud Elliott is joining us today for our first of the 2024 season behind enemy lines. Bud, Georgia Tech, Florida State. You and I were just kind of talking about. It's a little weird that we're talking, this kind of big of a game in Week 0. Typically, there's this Ireland game. There's a couple other ones, but man, I'm just ready to have college football back on my TV on Saturdays.
I'm excited, man. Like it's been what 200 something days since we had college football. Let's get this thing going.
Let's do it. Let's do it. All right. Let's talk a little bit about this game. Obviously, for folks that don't know, Bud obviously works 24/7 Sports. CBS does a great job with the podcast he has there. But a lot of people, who maybe people who tune into this, the Nolecast podcast, Bud, which I imagine you still love doing that. I did see. I don't know if you know this. Last year, obviously, I cover LSU for 24/7 Sports. I did see you go live post game outside the stadium of that just beat down that Florida State put on LSU. And so, man, I know you get to talk the national stage, but this is kind of the fun stuff, the passion
Yeah,
project.
yeah. It was a real blast. We started it in like 2009 or 2010, I think. So it's really just kind of got fortunate. My podcast partner was in radio and was like, "Hey, man, I was at this convention for radio. There's this new thing coming called a podcast." I'm like, what's a podcast? And like, we should do one on Florida State. And I was like, all right, yeah, cool, man, let's do it. So real kind of first mover advantage of the marketplace, but it's still a whole lot of fun. And because it's not my main gig, it's like we just only want to do it when we think there's actually something interesting to talk about.
Exactly.
So it's like once a week in the off season, 3 times a week during the season, and that kind of takes care of it for us.
Well, man, obviously we got news because look, Georgia Tech and Florida State going to be prime time to watch on Saturday. That noon kickoff Eastern. But let's just kind of dive into this because I've given the Georgia Tech fans kind of my early thoughts on Sunday night, and we'll go into more of a preview on the Georgia Tech side of things on Thursday. But from your vantage point, you guys talked about this in the Nolecast the other day, and I wanted to kick off with this. You mentioned Georgia Tech as one of those games that you should win, not one of those that you have to win, but one of those that you should win. Kind of give me your vantage point. What's the Florida State viewpoint of this Georgia Tech team coming into 2024?
Yeah, I think if you're Florida State, given how much you lost off last year's team in terms of experience and talent and cohesiveness, I don't think you love where this game falls. Right? You'd
Mm,
probably rather open up with more of a cupcake just to kind of get some kinks out and run everything through the pipes, if you will. But that's not the case. So they're going to play this thing in Ireland, which honestly, I don't know how much I buy into this because it's a small sample set, but some weird stuff has happened in these Ireland games. I mean,
yeah.
Penn State almost lost to a horrendous UCF team a couple of years ago. Nebraska, whether or not they were out at the casino all night, I don't know, but they lost to Northwestern in that one with Scott Frost a couple of years back. I don't expect FSU will hit the casino that hard the night before the game, but anyway, it's just a lot of new moving pieces for the
Yeah.
Noles. They are pretty talented. I was a little surprised. Pete Thamel went on ESPN yesterday and said they're the best defensive line in the country. And I was
Mm,
like, I kind of think they potentially are like top five ish
yeah.
because like there's some guys on this team that a lot of people don't know about that are probably going to get drafted like top 100. But like maybe Thamel's heard some really really good stuff on it. So like for him to come out and say that number one defensive line in the country is like, oh my god.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how well they can kind of gel early in the season. Like, is that defensive communication good? I think Georgia Tech, because they are so experienced and they return so much. And then I'm interested, like, can Georgia Tech block them? Right, because
Yeah.
they blocked Georgia okay, which I was pretty impressed with. And then Clemson's defensive front just ragdolled them. I was like,
Mhm.
so what's Tech seems really, really good if it can block somebody, obviously against most teams. What is the level of the offensive line play, I guess?
Yeah. Yeah. No, those are good points. And I think, they just came out with the depth chart. Brent Key announced it about an hour ago. It's a veteran group. It's a veteran group, but as I think we've seen in college football, continuity helps. But when you return, sometimes you don't want to stay status quo. You don't want to stay where you were last year. And that's going to be the biggest thing. Can Georgia Tech be more dynamic? Now, look, Bud, one thing that a lot of Tech fans have been asking me, and they've said, hey, throw this in this behind the enemy lines. And then we'll move on to some more things at Florida State. The Alex Atkins thing. I mean, this has been something that's kind of been out there for a while that we kind of
Yeah.
expected. But how much does this really affect the game day environment that Florida State's going to walk into?
I would say almost none because they've been prepping for it for 18 months, right? And
Yeah.
keep in mind, Atkins, his first year as the OC was last season, right?
Yeah.
Before that, it was Kenny Dillingham. So they've already kind of gone through an OC change. I usually come back to the idea that it is Mike Norvell's offense, right? He's run it, at Memphis, prior to that at Arizona State, and now at Florida State through multiple different coordinators. But the principles largely don't change. Gabe Fertitta is the guy who's going to handle calling it with Mike. He's been with the program for 4 seasons, so like he's kind of been through Dillingham, through Atkins. I don't really, and he also works with the O line. So like all these guys who are now 23, 24 years old, it's a really old O line group. I think all the top 7 linemen for FSU are 23 years of age or older. So they've been with Gabe for a long time. Like they kind of know what the deal is. So I really don't anticipate real problems with that, to be honest, especially not since they've had a chance to rep it. If a guy got sick last minute or something and you got a guy who's never called it before, that's a little different, I guess.
Well, and it's like I said on Sunday Night Show. I mean, look, this is something that maybe the general college football fan that only tunes in, Labor Day weekend to into January said, "Oh, that's a big deal." And look, Alex Atkins is a big piece of what Florida State does. But like you mentioned, you have a lot of veteran guys there that have done this before. And then this is something that Norvell and company. If he's as good as the coaches, I believe he is, and you do as well. This is something they've been looking at and been kind of coaching for and planning for.
Totally. And I mean, I don't know how many folks realize this, but like a lot of your call sheets done early, right? Like you're going over this with Atkins, by the way, in the meeting. All right, what do we like for our second and mediums? What do we like for our third and longs? Okay, what shot plays do we feel like we're actually comfortable with? We executed well in practice. Cool. So we got we got our 4 tricks. We got our 3 shots. We got our You're not carrying like that many plays into a college football game. Like you're carrying a certain number and then a certain number of tags, and for the most part, like you're kind of calling it just situationally. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. We got 8, second and mediums today. Cool. Pick one.
Yeah, no, it's something that it matters, but it doesn't,
Yeah.
especially with a staff like Florida State has. All right, let's jump into this game. I've talked about this matchup. This is the one I've told Georgia Tech fans it scares me. This running game that I think for Florida State can be very, very good in 2024 against a defensive line that, yes, we've heard all offseason that Tyler Santucci is going to be good at Georgia Tech, and I think he will. I don't think he has the horses that he had at Duke, especially in that veteran talent that they had, those 2 or 3 guys. When you look at this, is that a matchup where Florida State should be able to circle and say, hey, if we win this, if we win the run game, we should be able to win this game pretty comfortably?
I mean, I don't know if I'm ever going to say comfortably for an international game in game 1, but yeah, I think if you can run the football successfully, your odds of success go way up in the ball game, because I don't really think this offense, where it's at in its developmental curve for the season, is particularly well suited to play with a big deficit. I mean, small, sure, like you can kind of stay on schedule and on script, but they have run the ball well in practice, and they have felt good about how the run game is. And like, look, that could mean the offensive line is a lot better. It was very dinged up last year, and I think they had, I don't know, 8 or 9 guys play like 300 snaps, for instance. So like it was a real revolving door of who was in there, and sometimes a revolving door of pressure on Jordan Travis. But I feel like they feel pretty good. Or maybe it means that the defensive is, what they're running right now is maybe not that great. Who knows? Like maybe the defense is not as good as we think, and that's the reason for some of the run success in practice. But I generally don't think that all those guys who are going to be drafted highly all of a sudden can't play run defense. So I think the offensive line is probably better than it's been maybe in about a decade, honestly.
I like that. We talk about run game. Every college football fan knows if you can run the ball effectively, it opens up things for the quarterback position. DJU, I mean, look, Georgia Tech fans have been on social media, talking a little bit about, hey, how dynamic can he really be? They feel like his ceiling is lower than maybe Florida State fans expect it to be. What is your expectation? Maybe not for the season, because like we've talked about, you have to view this in a microcosm of one game, international, it's a one-off. How effective do you feel like he can be? What's he look like during fall camp? And just maybe your level of confidence heading into this game of, hey, let's say Florida State's down 10, with 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter, your level of confidence for him to be able to lead this team to a win if he has to.
I mean, down 10, pretty low, honestly. It's not really on him totally. I think it's more about like the receivers, who I don't think are really anything special, by FSU standards. I think they are pretty pleased with what they have in DJ. ultimately. I mean, there were some decent options in the portal you could have picked from, and I think they saw what Oregon State did with him. They obviously played him as well when he was at Clemson, and he beat him in Tallahassee pretty bad like 2 seasons ago. So I think they are generally pleased, and in fact, I think he's been a little better than they thought he was going to be. He showed up and got in good shape. I think he's more in that like 240 range as opposed to like closer to 260. Looks pretty mobile. DJ's a guy that Oregon State ran him some, especially in short yardage. Clemson definitely ran him. So the mobility piece as well, I think, is key there. And last year, Florida State was not able to push the ball over the top of the defense. Part of that was because Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson got hurt pretty quickly, and they just never really had a speed guy over the top. This year, the receiving core is very different. I mean, they are a lot smaller and a lot faster. So there's good and bad that comes with that. I think mostly bad, but there's certainly some possibilities for some good. So, and clearly Norvell, if you watch him at Memphis, most of his time in Tallahassee, he likes to throw the ball over the top. And DJ's he does have a really huge arm. So I think they'll probably try to do that quite a bit.
You talked a little bit how this offense is going to look different. And of course, you have to adapt to the weapons you have. How drastic is that going to be from last season, and what's your expectation?
I mean, I would just expect more run game, right?
Okay.
To start, like you don't have a guy that I think you trust to just drop back and sling it all over, but that's also in concert, with the receivers. I don't know that, like the Malik Benson's going to be their number one. And to be frank, he was terrible last year at Alabama. Now, I think part of that is him, and part of that is probably some of the stuff they were doing at Alabama. I know Texas, pretty happy with Bond, and obviously, Burton's in the NFL now. So maybe that was some of what Bama's offense was running. But I don't know that you have great confidence when it's 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8. So if I'm calling it, it's like, all right, let's run some shot plays early and let's run the ball. And they have a guy who is probably on the short list for the best punter in the country. So that's actually something I think is sort of underrated about this team. I mean, they were, I think, 5th overall in Bill Connolly's SP Plus special teams ratings last year. Everybody of consequence is back for that. I think they actually improved at kickoff specialists this year. So I would expect Florida State to win the field position game and sort of the hidden yardage game in almost every contest. I think if you're Norvell, you're telling DJ, hey, a punt's not going to get us killed. Like, teams are not going to drop 40 on this defense very often. So it's okay. If it ain't there, throw it away. Mastromano can punt the ball, and then they got to go block these 4 guys who they expect to get drafted.
You kind of led into this, and I think the confidence for Georgia Tech fans coming into this is an offense that was good last year, but I have been kind of it's a cautionary tale. I have maintained, Bud, that Haynes King brought stability to a position that was wandering in the wilderness. I mean, some good athletes when Jeff Collins, when you had at quarterback, but it just never really materialized. Haynes King, yeah, he had the great season. The stat that keeps continuing to be thrown around is, hey, he had great numbers, like a lot like Jaden Daniels. I watched Jaden Daniels all last season. Widely different players, and Haynes King was at the bottom of that list, while obviously Jaden Daniels kind of setting the pace. This defense for Florida State, though, like you mentioned, it doesn't feel like they're going to be giving up 35, 40 points week in, week out. I have maintained that Patrick Payton is a guy that is going to be a problem, not just in week 0, but I think throughout the entire season. How comfortable do you feel with this defense heading into a matchup where it feels like if Georgia Tech is going to have a chance to win this football game, they're going to have to score maybe nearly every single time they touch the football? I just don't know how likely that is.
Yeah, if Georgia Tech's defense is not able to get some stops against FSU, then I actually do like Tech's offense, but I really don't think that they can win if Florida State's dropping, mid-high 30s. Like that would be quite the surprise to me, because I do think Florida State will create enough havoc plays. They are pretty good usually at not allowing explosive plays. I like that Georgia Tech offense last year. I mean, watching them against Louisville, they really caught Louisville by surprise, I think, with a lot of stuff they were doing, and gave them fits. I don't know. It's like a 20-minute stretch in between like second, and part of the third, I guess, where they really came out, and Louisville was really confused. I mean, they kept scoring, obviously, against Ole Miss, and like they had some really, really good games. So like that was be like that's a good offense. They're going to score. I think Faulkner is a really good coach. I think if you're Georgia Tech, your best hope probably is like there's good and bad as far as the newness, right? I
Mhm.
don't think Florida State's defensive line depth is as good as it's been, but I think their frontline starters are really good. And that's a bad thing, I think, if you're playing them in game one, because the guys should, in theory, be fresh. Where it's a good thing to play them in game one, if you're Tech, is you got a lot of new pieces there, right? You have a new starting safety. You have two new starting linebackers. You have a new nickel. How do those guys communicate, right? Or do they screw up some of the communications that lead to poor run fits, or maybe turn guys loose in the secondary, making mistakes that you probably don't make maybe as the season goes on, as guys sort of settle into roles. So I think you can kind of argue it both ways as far as
Yeah.
is it really advantageous to play this game in game one for Tech? I think if you factor in Florida State's offense and where that is in the developmental curve, clearly you'd want to play FSU like tomorrow if you could. But defensively, yeah, like they should be. AZ Thomas, really good,
Yeah.
and they feel very nice about where Fentrell Cypress is now, kind of more back to that like 2022 form when he was first team All ACC. I would probably put their corner combo up against, I don't know, like pretty much anybody in the nation that's not named Ohio State or Virginia Tech, but
Yeah.
they're kind of right there with one of the truly elite corner combos in the country, I think. And um, again, can you block that front? I don't know. That's potentially a problem.
Yeah, it's potentially a problem. Obviously, you've got Peyton, like we talked about, Marvin Jones. It's a front that I think is going to be physical. It's going to be a really big test for Georgia Tech's offensive line. And when I go back and I've watched, gone back and watched the games where Haynes King struggled, but he typically tried to play a little bit of hero ball. Is when wide receivers weren't getting that separation, the run game. And Brent Key said this multiple times. The game they lost against Boston College, he straight up said in the post game radio interview, he said, we have to help Haynes out. Like we can't sit here and rely on him to throw the ball 35, 40 times and win us a football game. And so, yeah, he made some bad decisions, but we've got to put him in a better situation so he doesn't feel like he has to force the ball into those tight windows. And look, I mean, I've been impressed, just talking with some people around fall camp at Georgia Tech about the leap that Eric Singleton Jr. can take. I mean, obviously that's a guy Tech fans are excited about, but how does he avoid, now that everyone's going to know where he is on the field? He's not a surprise, to Florida State's defensive staff or anybody's defensive staff here in 2024. But you bring up some great points with this defense. You mentioned on the Nolecast podcast that you would be very pleasantly surprised. I think that if Tech only scored around 21 points, that would be impressive, which kind of goes into what you were talking about. You are impressed with this offense. I
Yeah.
know we're talking Florida State, Georgia Tech, but just where you feel like Georgia Tech is under Buster Faulkner. I know you alluded to that, and just maybe the trajectory of this program, regardless of what happens on Saturday.
Yeah, I've been pretty impressed with Brent since his UCF days. Actually, I live here in Orlando, so I think he's a really really good coach for Georgia Tech to get. And keeping Faulkner around. I mean, that's a guy that I would anticipate a lot of schools come calling for after seeing how he called the offense last year and how he's been developing it. Especially if King can take a step forward. I'll be interested to see like what kind of pace they play with.
Hmm.
Like last year, Tech did push pace at times for sure. Um, I would anticipate Florida State's probably not a super tempo team this year. They kind of want to lean on you and play, play run game defense and lean on those special teams as well. Not quite like Michigan, Iowa level, but you know what I'm talking about. Not maybe as wide open as they've been in some years. And
Yeah.
I'll have to see. Like, it's hard to make a pace projection on this game at times because I assume Tech's going to want to try to go really fast, right?
Mhm.
Like, they did at times last year. You got the helmet communication. I don't know if Key or Faulkner have spoke about what they want to do with that, but I know from other tempo guys they've certainly wanted to go pretty quick. Although Faulkner's not really like a true tempo guy. Like they can push the pace, but it's not always like blitz pace, I guess. Like I think if you hold Georgia Tech to low 20s, you feel pretty good. Unless Tech's defense is way better than it was last year, right? And
Yeah.
like that was, I mean, Florida State's offense good, Florida State's defense good, Tech's offense good, Tech's defense.
You
It's
could
a
say it.
lot of the same players from last year. So like, how much
Yeah,
magic can Santucci really work? I don't like Duke had better players last year than Tech does this year.
I agree.
Pretty sure.
Yeah.
I mean, they got guys drafted. They got guys who went to like upper P5 programs transferring out. I thought Duke had some of the most underrated DBs in the entire conference last year. Um, I don't know, like how big of a leap are you expecting on defense for Georgia Tech?
Yeah, I think when I look at this defense, one, it's going to take a ton of internal development. I mean, you look especially at that front seven. I mean, the two guys that I really keep looking at are Zeke Biggers, who has been this guy that Tech fans have seen as, hey, here's a lot of potential. This is the space-eating defensive tackle that Tech has needed when you talk about playing the Clemsons, the Florida States, the Georgias on their schedule year in year out. He's got to take a leap. Horace Lockett is another guy that I'm looking at, kind of in that interior, that I really feel like those two have to make an impact and be disruptive. Not just guys that are going to sit there and just, stalwart an opposing offensive lineman. They've got to be disruptive, get in the backfield. I'm excited to kind of see what Romello Height looks like. I mean, this is a guy who's bounced around. He comes back home, per se, to the state of Georgia. Reviews out of fall camp is that he's got really nice bend. He's looked fresh, which I think, from his time at Auburn and the USC, just never really kind of was able to had a couple injuries, and they just never really realized that potential. And that feels like where Tech kind of played when we talk about the transfer portal, Ben. A lot of guys that either wanted to come home or never really realized their potential elsewhere. You get past there, the linebacker room, but I was I had a strong voice on. I thought the linebacker room was one of the worst we saw in college football last year. It was pretty bad, and so you replace both of those guys. But is Trinius Tatum going to take a jump? You bring in EJ Lightsey over from Georgia. I think he's a great athlete. Got buried on the depth chart over there. Had an injury in Athens. Kyle Eford, I think Tech fans love him. He's going to be a fan favorite. Got the neck pad and everything. Little throwback for Tech fans. It's fun stuff, but I've maintained this. This is not a knock on the kid, but Bud, you see this as well. I don't think he's the most God-given talented kid on the football field. He gives 125%. So you're going to be able to play and get some snaps out of him. Secondary had to make too many tackles last year, and that resulted in LaMiles Brooks, who had a really good 2022 season, was injured, didn't play well in 2023. You got some guys that I think they're excited about. I think the biggest addition I'm waiting to watch is Warren Burrell, the transfer out of Tennessee, playing corner. He's got good length. He's got NFL style length that you want and size. And they bring him home to Atlanta. Reports that he's going to be starting alongside Amari Harvey, the former Auburn transfer, on the other side. So it's just a lot of, I would say, moving pieces, Bud. And we can kind of take it here where you don't have to give an official score prediction, but I just kind of laid out to you the three levels of Georgia Tech's defense. And I'm surprised at how many Georgia Tech fans are surprised that, I mentioned this on Sunday, 11 and a half points. Like, I kind of want to take Florida State minus 11 and a half. Now, I don't know if that line's going to move down, if it's going to move, especially with the injury that Georgia Tech had to tight end Brett Seither, starting tight end. He's out for the year. So,
oh shoot, when
yeah,
when was that announced?
like an hour and a half ago when we recorded this. Yeah. So he announced that. So tight end Seither's out for the year. I don't know. 11 and a half, it doesn't feel like a lot, but we'll have to see, because I'm really concerned about Georgia Tech's inability to stop the run. I think Florida State could line up, run it down their throat, and that's a worst case scenario.
Like, yeah, when I look at this, Bryce, I mean, it's, first of all, in my notes, Tech had 2 undrafted free agent tight ends off last year's team. It's like decent tight ends that have made rosters or made camps.
Yes.
Like, that's a fairly, so I don't know, like the way I score this offseason stuff. If you're Ohio State and you lose an undrafted free agent, I don't really give a damn. Like, you recruit Ohio State wise. If you're Georgia Tech and you lose 2 guys who are undrafted free agents who make rosters, to me, that's a big deal, right?
Yeah.
And then to lose your starting tight end, because that kind of means you got both your tackles have to kind of, basically play naked, or you're putting somebody over them who was what, like the tight end 4 off last year's roster, basically.
They're going to put in, and they announced this, Avery Boyd, who's kind of played this flex position. So he's came in as a receiver, bulked up, and so essentially you're looking at a flex with a couple tight end 4s as potential options there.
So they're going to run basically lighter personnel and more spready.
Yeah.
I actually love that for FSU. I think their backup corners would start for a lot of the ACC teams. I don't know if I'd love them in defending like some of the 12 personnel stuff. If the tight ends are like legitimate good blockers, because then you kind of got to keep. I think if you told FSU, hey, you can jump in dime, you're like, gotcha, done. Yeah, all right, nope. Yeah. Like we will play the entire game in dime if you want to play in dime. That's I didn't know the tight end was out. That to me was something I was looking at, because I had him rated as like a decent replacement, like maybe not a huge drop off from losing 2 guys to the NFL. Is it fair to say that like running at height and Harris is kind of the right thing to do? Like those guys to me seem like they're smaller. They want to get off the edge, and running right at them is kind of the way to go. I would think.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, to me, I think they're more of this new position that this rush end. They'd rather stand up and kind of like I said, like if your interior guys are going to be taken out of the play, if I'm Florida State's offense, I'm running right at Height, who is probably the best defensive lineman that you've got outside. And then obviously Kevin Harris is there. Sylvain Yanjuan, uh, coming off an ACL injury, how much is he really going to be able to give you in terms? I mean, there's just a lot of questions.
That makes sense. Yeah, I don't know that I would like hammer FSU here. I think the spread, I mean, the spread's basically just ping pong between 13 and 10.5 all off season, barring some like new injury information coming out on either side, like more than a tight end's not going to really move the spread. Um, I think it'll stay kind of in that range. If it ticks 10, I'm sure people will buy we'll lay the 10. If somehow went up to 14, I'm sure you'd have people take 14 again or 13.5. I was kind of thinking like low 20s to low 30s at
Yeah.
FSU, but like not. I don't think I really have confidence in this passing offense to blow people out right now, to be honest.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's fair. I think that's kind of where I said. I mean, I think they'll be able to control the line of scrimmage. I don't think they're going to ask DJU to do a ton, kind of like you alluded to earlier. I mean, just make smart decisions. You make smart decisions, you get to fly back home. And Bud, obviously, I don't know how much we'll be able to catch up with you throughout the rest of the season, but you
Enjoy
guys
it.
get a chance to go play. You don't play till the next Monday night, right? So you kind of get a
Yeah,
little. They get back from Ireland, and then they go they go straight into was it Boston College on Monday night?
Boston College. Yeah, man.
Okay, all right. Well, then, I've said this: Georgia Tech, win or lose, they got to turn around and play Georgia State in Atlanta on a night kickoff on a Saturday. I don't know what the early spread is on that, and I know Georgia State's a transitional team, and I just kind of think that is it's interesting. Also, Georgia State's starting quarterback is probably going to be Tech's third stringer from last year,
Oh,
so
the,
lot of
he'll
lot of
know them,
interesting
but they will know him
storylines.
as well. So.
Exactly, exactly. Bud Elliott does a great job. Bud, first off, before we get you out of here, man, tell everybody where they can find not only Nolecast, but what you guys do on the Cover 3 podcast.
Sure. Yeah. So check us out. Cover 3 podcasts, Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Saturday evenings on YouTube. And then also at 2:00 every Tuesday on CBS Sports Network, the cable channel. And you can find me on Twitter at Bud Elliott 3.
Awesome. Well, it's Bud Elliott. This is Behind Enemy Lines, just a couple days from game day in Ireland. Bud's going to have, obviously, a good time enjoying himself week 0 before it really sets in. And so will we. So we appreciate everyone tuning in. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and we'll catch you next time here on the Swarm Talk, all things Georgia Tech on the Crowded Booth.